Hello, this recorded lecture are for people who missed class the first week coming back on campus, either for my first, second, third, or fifth period. So I just want to make sure you're able to keep up and know what we did in class, okay? And I made this an ed puzzle so that you can still, participate in the questions like we would have done in class. So you'll have an additional little assignment for missing class because you couldn't participate in class. But it's not a lot of questions. It's mostly just the lecture so you can know what it is that your assignment is and it'll make sense for you. Okay, so let's start. So we started off with this warm-up question. And I know you're like, Mrs. Wilson, this is a literature class. Why are you asking these questions? Well, trust me, we're going somewhere with it. So just bear with me for a minute. So the first question I want you to answer in the chat box, in the little text box there is, and these are all kind of the same question, but just phrased in different ways. So you can answer any one of these that you want. You can either answer, what is art to you? Like, define it for me. Or sometimes it's easier to say what it isn't. So you can also answer what isn't art. Or you can answer the question, like, what are the necessary and sufficient conditions of art? That means, like, what has to be there for something to be art, and what's enough to make something art? Because I could have some paint on paper, but is that enough to make it art? What if it's just a spill, right? So what are the necessary sufficient conditions to make something a piece of art? Or you can answer the question, how do you know art when you see it or you hear it? So it's more of an intuitive question. Because I think most people have a sense of, yeah, that's art, or no, that's not art. Well, how do you know that? So please answer this question in the box. So some of the answers that we had in class I'll share out that we've had so far are things like art has to have meaning, it has to be created by a person. Some people suggested it needs to be beautiful. But then we ask questions like, does it have to be? There's a lot of art that's meant to be ugly. And does art have to have a meaning? What if somebody's meaning was to have no meaning? And then, well, that's your meaning then. So you're still not out of it. Ha ha ha. But it's a kind of a hard question to answer. Does it have to have a certain form? Does art have to be only made by human beings? Could art be made by, an elephant, let's say? Or does it just have to be a thinking being? Does it have to be on purpose, or can accidents be art? So that's it's a really controversial question, and it doesn't matter what you put in your answer in the chat box, because this is something people with PhDs argue about still. In fact, some of the biggest questions are, some of the biggest fights, I should say, are, is art dependent on the artist saying it's art, or is art dependent upon the audience? Does the perceiver be the one that defines what art is, or is it the artist? So which one? That's an important question that's going to connect to what we're doing. So then we asked another series of questions. Same kind of thing, but now we're getting into the kind of art that we're going to be doing this quarter a lot, which is poetry, right? And so before we start writing poetry, we have to define, well, what the heck is a poem? So what makes a poem and not prose? Prose being like an essay or something, right? Paragraphs as opposed to a poem, or more straightforward kind of writing. What's the difference? What has to be there? What are the necessary and sufficient conditions for poetry? Or again, how do you know poetry when you read it or hear it? What's in it that makes you go, yeah, that's a poem, or nah, that's not a poem? So whichever question you want to answer that in the text box. So some of the answers we got out of this, some suggestions, were like, well, it has to be kind of musical, or have a rhythm, or a pattern to it. Some people suggested rhyming, but then they backtracked and said, well, but it doesn't always have to rhyme. But at least it has to be kind of like a song, sort of, in a way. Some people said it's got to be made out of words, that there's a certain shape, tends to be shorter. But then what about the Iliad and the Odyssey? That's a gigantic poem that's longer than most books. What about the Bible? If you've ever read the Bible, it's very poetic, yet it's in paragraphs. but it feels like poetry a lot of the time. So is that a poem or is it prose? So we had some interesting conversations about how that's even messy. And one person even said something about how there is no line between poetry and prose. It's all poetry. And even and all poems are prose. Because most poems you read, they are just sentences. Like look at this one by Charles Bukowski. It says, and it's called Cause and Effect. It says, the best often die by their own hand just to get away, and those left behind can never quite understand why anybody would ever want to get away from them. That's just a sentence. What makes that a poem then? Is it just the way he cut it up? So it's hard. It's hard to answer that question, and poetry is rough. But it's also an amazing thing to be able to create. Another person even offered the idea that it has to have like every single word means something, whereas sometimes in prose you've got fluff and filler, right? Where every single word matters in a poem. So it's more like concise and dense. And that might be true. But we're going to talk about a art movement that we're going to be mimicking with our first poetry. We're going to be learning to write Dada poetry first. Dadaists, which I know it's a funny name. We'll talk about what it is in a minute. Dadaists, it is funny, and they do have a sense of humor. They disagree with just about all of those theories. And so let's talk a little bit about what Dada is, and their philosophy, I think, might help, is a great way to start writing poetry because they're not snobs. This is not meant for the elite, yet it is elitist at the same time. It's an accessible poetry form that anybody can do. And so I think it makes it poetry less scary to start here. So what is Dada? Dada is an art movement that's an anti-art movement, which you're like, what? It was meant to question the standard established ideas of what art was supposed to be. Like, it's got to be beautiful. It's got to be refined. It has to have really strong artistic merit. And they're like, nuh-uh. It can be rebellious, offensive, and anti-aesthetic. It can be totally ugly. In fact, there's a movement of art called Art Brut that came after Dada as part of the Dada kind of like modernist movement that was a related art movement after Dada, where artists were purposely making this kind of horrific art and they found like beauty in the horror. And that makes a lot of sense because Dadaism came about in the early 20th century in the middle of the Spanish flu and World War One. And so there's so much horrible experiences that these people in Europe that were going through World War One and the Spanish flu. All these horrors made them really question everything, the meaning of life. Is beauty the ultimate aesthetic? What are rules? So it really made them question everything. I like to call them like the first punks. They're just an art anarchy movement that came out of all that pain and suffering. And what's great about it, like we've gone through a lot, right? We've gone through our own internal war, having our own Spanish flu. Although Spanish flus killed more people, but that's because we've got so much better medicine now. But nevertheless, the whole world was turned upside down for a couple years, and so we're going through something very similar. So that's another reason why I wanted to talk about this. But what's great about what Dadaists did is they actually were having a lot of fun, like laughing and poking fun at all the serious horrors. Sometimes the best way to deal with trauma is to be able to laugh, right? And to be silly and be tongue in cheek, right? Winking. So, and it led to a lot of other important movements like surrealism and pop art, all sorts of stuff. In fact, we may not even have had memes if it wasn't for Dadaists. So if you are a meme fan, say thank you, Dada. So what's Dada's philosophy? What were the Dadaists thinking? As I said, it was born out of the negative reaction to the horrors of the First World War, but it had this kind of playfulness about it, where it rejected reason and logic, prizing nonsense, irrationality, and intuition. So things didn't have to make sense. Like there are poems that say nothing more than da 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 da. I'm not kidding. Or there's a sound poems that Tristan Zara would do that none of the phrases made any sense purposefully. It was just the sounds that mattered to him. And that begs the question, was that a poem or was that just nonsense? A lot of people, this was controversial, thought that's not a poem, son. But the Dadists were like, nay, sir, it is. And it was begun by this group of artists and poets that were associated with this famous nightclub in Zurich, Switzerland called the Cabaret Voltaire. Zurich, Switzerland is a beautiful place, and it was a safe place to be in World War I. I don't know if you know this, but Switzerland is a neutral country. Nobody, there was no war there. War did not touch it. World War I or World War II. They didn't want to be any part of it. And they're really high in the mountains, and it's really hard to get to anyway. It's not like an easy place to fight. So they're very protected up there. It's very high altitudes you can't see with all those mountains. It's in the Alps between France and Italy and Germany, or Austria. So they speak many, many languages, and they're really more about banking. They just don't have skin in the game. They don't care about it. So people that were trying to run away from the war, this was a great place to get to if you could. And so it kind of makes sense that this is where people were able to get away from the war and kind of protest the war with their art. And this is the actual building, although it's been, made more modern since 1918, 16. This is the club that has been open ever since 1916, the Cabaret Voltaire. You can still go visit it. And I know it's kind of hard to tell, but this is a very steep street. The whole town's very hilly, so you're going to get your calves work out if you ever get to go there. But this is the inside of it where the whole art movement kind of got famous, where they would do performance art, read poetry, put up their artistic creations on the walls. And it was just this kind of collective social movement, which memes are kind of like that if you think about it. Memes are this thing that somebody makes that starts it, made from other things, and then people take off with that and make new things out of somebody else's idea that was somebody else's idea, and it just grows and grows and grows and becomes like, there's like famous memes that are just part of our culture, like it's part of our unified experience. And that's kind of what it was like to be inside the Cabaret Voltaire, is that there was this kind of making their own little kind of taking art from each other and expanding and adding and reusing. In fact, a lot of their art is what's considered found art. So to give you a little flavor of what Dada is like, I'm going to play for you this little video. Let me see if I can mute myself somehow. I normally do this with headphones. I don't have any on me. It's probably going to have a really bad echo if I don't. Let me see if I could turn it off when I hit play. We'll see. I will try. So sorry if the audio is really bad. What? How did that happen? That makes no sense. What's going on? I approved it. Well, that video just won't work, so never mind. Sorry about that. It's approved. I don't know why it keeps saying no, but maybe it's a screencastify problem. Anyway, so let's move on to what the word Dada means. Dada is a nonsense word. Well, there's a lot of theories, actually. And nobody can really agree. Even the Dadaists themselves can't agree as to where the word Dada came from. Some say it means nothing, and that's the whole point. That's the philosophy. There is no meaning. Whereas a couple of poets named Tristan Zara and Marcel Iancu, they were from Romania, and the way to say yes in Romania is the. And so it was kind of like a making fun of them, because you would constantly hear all these people, the Cabaret Voltaire, saying and so it just became Dada because it was associated with that. There's another legend that because they love randomness, that they threw a knife into a dictionary and randomly picked a word off of a page, and it happened to hit the French word because it was a French-German dictionary. Pick a French word for hobby horse. Dada is hobby horse. And there's even more silly ones, but there's no like consensus about what it is. But I think maybe one of the best kind of ways to kind of understand what Dada is this quote from the artist Haussmann, who said, "Dada is what you make out of yourself." They really believe that art is all about self-expression, and what matters is what the artist says. If I say it's art, it's art. It's not about this bourgeois elite saying, "Oh, that's art, but that's just a craft." No, they had no line between high art and low art. If a human being with passion and intention decides that something is art, it's art, even if it's something they found in the trash. In fact, they're one of the ones that would take, they were very famous for being the first to kind of take a bunch of made things that they did not make and put it together and make something new out of it. So it's kind of like a remix. So most of the music you guys listen to is probably a bunch of sampling from other songs that were inspired by other songs. So that remixed Dada culture is kind of part of what we are now. So that kind of the idea of having a collage art like this, that started with the Dadaists. And the only rule they had is that there are no rules. It's a kind of art anarchy. So when we're writing our Dada poetry, which I'll show you that's like in a minute, there are no rules, just art anarchy. And so, as I said, they remix things into something new. Like if you've ever heard of the artist Banksy, he was famous for taking one of the things he did is he took a British red telephone booth that was being decommissioned and then cut it in half at an angle and then put it together at a weird angle so it had a bend in it. And then he put all sorts of other stuff on it and he left it in the middle of the street as a kind of, because he's known for what's called street art. I think there was an axe in it and like fake blue blood coming out of it that was just probably like poured resin. It might even have been real red blood. I'm trying to remember. I haven't seen it in a long time. If I had thought about it, I would have shown it to you in the presentation. Sorry about that. You could look it up. Just look up Banksy phone booth. So he took something that he didn't even make. He just altered it and then added some stuff to it. And boom, it was a Banksy sculpture that sold for a ton of money. So it's very Dada. Okay. And as I said, art's defined by who the artist says, points at something and says, that's art. Okay. And here's some classic examples. Like, for example, this is one that was made, I can't remember the artist for this one, but it's a bunch of just schematics, right? For like patent office designs to try to get approved for a patent. And I just slapped it together and said, there you go. That's my painting or drawing. This is a famous one from Marcel Duchamp. Marcel Duchamp's kind of like the biggest Dadaist of them all. He took this bicycle wheel that he found and attached it to a stool. And he called it a sculpture. And guess what? It's very expensive and it's in a museum right now in Pennsylvania. And even worse, his most famous sculpture, air quote sculpture, is a urinal that he took, turned it upside down, signed R. Mutt 1917. And now it's this huge piece of art because it was pretty funny what he did. There was this art show that the local museum in New York was saying anybody could submit a piece of art and we're going to put it up. Any piece of art, we will put it up. So it was kind of like a public community kind of art thingy. So he said, oh yeah, you'll take anything, huh? Uh-huh, I bet you won't. So he thought of the most like offensive, weird thing he could do. And he submitted this and they said, no, that's not a sculpture. That's not art. He's like, aha, so you are hypocrites. Hoo-ha-ha. So it became this kind of famous kind of, they're kind of like edgelords, right? Messing around, messing with people. And he won because now that thing's worth millions of dollars and it's in a museum. So he won that fight. And then here's another kind of like collage art from that time. But let me show you some more modern ones too. Dada is, again, is this kind of, you take something that was and make it something that is. Like this person just happened to take a print of an old painting and then just put some Japanese words and stickers and paint all over it and made it something new. This guy, Guy Laramie, had taken a book of an atlas and cut it up and put holes where all the stars are, and then shaved it down and made it and painted it to make it look like the mountains of China. It's beautiful. And that was a book. He did not make the book. He couldn't have had this sculpture without the book being made for him. And I'm sure lots of artists designed those star charts. But at least one artist that isn't him. But so whose art is it, right? Is it Guy Laramie? No, it is pronounced Guy, trust me. French name is not Guy, it's Guy. Or, is it, the people who originally made the book? I don't know. And is an encyclopedia or an atlas even a piece of art? I see how this is coming together. There's this great TED Talk. Let's see if it works. I just want to show you some other examples of how, and this is kind of a metaphor for what we're going to be doing with our poetry. We're going to take something that was and make it something that is your poem. So just for fun, I want to show this to you. Hopefully the audio doesn't stink and it plays. Let's see. It's short. It's like 6 minutes.
I'm an artist, and I cut books. This is one of my first book works. It's called Alternate Route to Knowledge. And I wanted to create a stack of books so that somebody could come into the gallery and think that they're just looking at a regular stack of books. But then as they got closer, they would sort of see this rough hole carved into it and wonder what was happening and wonder why and think about the material of the book. So I'm interested in the texture, but I'm more interested in the text and the images that we find within books. In most of my work, what I do is I seal the edges of a book with a thick varnish, so it's creating sort of a skin on the outside of the book. So it becomes a solid material, but then the pages inside are still loose. And then I carve into the surface of the book, and I'm not moving or adding anything. I'm just carving around whatever I find interesting. So everything you see within the finished piece is exactly where it was in the book before I began. I think of my work as sort of a remix in a way, because I'm working with somebody else's material in the same way that a DJ might be working with somebody else's music. This was a book of Raphael paintings, the Renaissance artist, and by sort of taking his work and remixing it, carving into it, I'm sort of making it into something that's more new and more contemporary. I'm thinking also about breaking out of the box of the traditional book and pushing that linear format and try to push the structure of the book itself, so that the book can become fully sculptural. I'm using clamps and ropes and all sorts of materials, weights, in order to hold things in place before I varnish so that I can push the form before I begin, so that something like this can become a piece like this, which is just made from a single dictionary. Or something like this can become a piece like this. Or something like this, which who knows what that's going to be or why that's in my studio, will become a piece like this. So I think one of the reasons people are disturbed by destroying books, people don't want to rip books, and nobody really wants to throw away a book, is that we think about books as living things. We think about them as a body. And they're created to relate to our body as far as scale, but they also have the potential to continue to grow and to continue to become new things. So books really are alive. So I think of the book as a body, and I think of the book as a technology. I think of the book as a tool. And I also think of the book as a machine. I also think of the book as a landscape. This is a full set of encyclopedias that's been connected and sanded together. And as I carve through it, I'm deciding what I want to choose. So with encyclopedias, I could have chose anything, but I specifically chose images of landscapes. And with the material itself, I'm using sandpaper and sanding the edges, so not only the images suggest landscape, but the material itself suggests landscape as well. So one of the things I do is when I'm carving through the book, I'm thinking about images, but I'm also thinking about text, and I think about them in a very similar way. Because what's interesting is that when we're reading text, when we're reading a book, it puts images in our head. So we're sort of filling that piece where we're sort of creating images when we're reading text. And when we're looking at an image, we actually use language in order to understand what we're looking at. So there's sort of a yin-yang that happens, sort of a flip-flop. So I'm creating a piece that the viewer is sort of completing themselves. And I think of my work as almost an archaeology. I'm excavating and I'm trying to maximize the potential and discover as much as I possibly can and exposing it within my own work. But at the same time, I'm thinking about this idea of erasure and what's happening now that most of our information is intangible, and this idea of loss. And this idea that not only is the format constantly shifting within computers, but the information itself, now that we don't have a physical backup, kind of has to constantly be updated in order to not lose it. Now, I have several dictionaries in my own studio, and I do use a computer every day, and if I need to look up a word, I'll go on the computer, because I can go directly and instantly to what I'm looking up. I think that the book was never really the right format for nonlinear information, which is why we're seeing reference books becoming the first to be endangered or extinct. So I don't think that the book will ever really die. People think that, now that we have digital technology, the book is going to die, and we are seeing things shifting and things evolving. I think that the book will evolve. And just like people said painting would die when photography and printmaking became everyday materials, but what it really allowed painting to do was it allowed painting to quit its day job. It allowed painting to not have to have that everyday chore of telling a story. And painting became free. It was allowed to tell its own story. And that's when we saw modernism emerge and we saw painting go into different branches. And I think that's what's happening with books now that most of our technology, most of our information, most of our personal and cultural records are in digital form. I think it's really allowing the book to become something new. So I think it's a very exciting time for an artist like me, and it's very exciting to see what will happen with the book in the future. Thank you.
So hopefully you got to hear that, fingers crossed. But that's some pretty neat stuff. And we're going to kind of do that. We're going to take something that was written and turn it into something new. So we're going to make, just like this guy, Sean Malloy, we're going to take a painting of Philip IV, metaphorically, turn it into something new. Like Amelia Keller, taking maps, magazines, or comic books to make something new. Now, normally, depending on which class you're in, if you're in my third period, I'm going to be doing one assignment. And if you're in my first, second, or fifth, you're doing a different assignment. My third period, you're getting a very aleatory assignment. And you'll have to do it later when you get to class, or otherwise I have to scan it and send it to you. I guess I could do that. Aleatory means things left up to chance. Randomness is a big part of Dadaist art and philosophy. In fact, Marcel Duchamp even did a symphony where he just had this contraption, that kind of like very basic machine that would like plunk sounds, like notes, randomly. And he just hit record, and you can listen to it. It's pretty crazy. I can send you a link to it. It was just randomly done, and it's considered his symphony. But he didn't write it. He just set up the machine that kind of set up the randomness. But that was a super Dada thing. And that's a big question. Is that even music or a song? Because it's kind of all over the place. So Dada poetry, though, there's a few different ways you can do that. Because we're not literally going to do anything with paintings or magazines unless you want to add that to your poem. There's a couple different things you're going to do. If you are in period 3, you're not going to be doing this. But if you're in periods 1, 2, and 5, you may do this one. So let me explain what periods 1, 2, and 5 are doing, and then I'll explain period 3. Periods 1, 2, and 5, what's going to happen is you guys are going to be given a paper copy when you come back, a paper copy of your narrative essay that you wrote, that you picked um, for the Pandamour Journal of Sorrows. What you're going to do to it is you're going to, one thing, you have a couple options. One thing you can do is do what this poem by Tristan Tzara, one of the founding Dadaists, did for some of the poetry. Because at the Cabaret Voltaire, what they would do is they would take like a magazine or a newspaper, cut up a bunch of, find an article, cut up a bunch of random words, throw it into this like top hat. I believe it was a green top hat, like the Mad Hatter, and people will just pick out a bunch of random words out of it and then put it together in the order that they took it out of the hat, and then that would be the poem. So here's a poem giving you the directions of an option. You can do this to your own narrative essay where you're going to cut it up into a bunch of pieces and then re-put it together to make a poem. Do you have to use all the words? Nope. Right? Just as many as you want. One is probably too small. But let's look at this. So this is the directions of an option you can do. Take a newspaper, although in this case it'd be your essay. Take some scissors. Choose from this paper an article the length you want to make your poem. Cut out the article. Next, carefully cut out each of the words that make up this article and put them in a bag. Shake gently. Next, take out each cutting one after the other. Copy conscientiously in the order in which they left the bag. The poem will resemble you. And there you are, an infinitely original author of charming sensibility, even though unappreciated by the vulgar herd. So you have already kind of written your poem, you guys. You're just finishing it. That's one way you could do it. Okay, it could be random. You could be super Dada and be random. But let's look at some examples of random ones to see if that's something you're interested in. Like this was taken from an article clearly about the indigenous peoples of Canada. But look at it. I don't think it makes sense. Of name with north means exhibit Greenland northwest of the people. Vast masks, material tribes, and Kwakiutl Haida Arctic peoples areas, the regions, through and Labrador dealing the across coast exhibit inhabit. Like, it's like, what? That's not very pretty. So just if you are going to do that, mind you, it will be random and crazy. Super Dada. You may or may not be interested in this form. And here's another one. You could cut it up and glue it on a piece of paper, or you could just write it out and type it up in the order it came out. Like this one by Jennifer Dobbins was done by a student from a newspaper in Arizona, and it's super random, but she decided to not glue it, but to or tape it. She decided to just type it out. So you could do that if you still want to have that really random, crazy poem like this one, which if you look at it, it doesn't make any sense. Not really. I mean, it's got some emotion to it, but like drink water, but it's not as sensical as maybe you would like. But you could also do this if you want to do the cutout method. You could cut out a bunch of words and then pick of the words that you choose, but you can only pick the words out of the essay you already wrote. Okay, where you're going to cut it out and put it on the paper in a way that makes sense to you. Because like this one was clearly taken from a newspaper and a magazine, and that they were forced to use only the words that they saw, that they had in front of them. And they glued it in a way that made sense. And it came out really beautiful. Let's look at the poem. It says, Ancestor. His deported story beckons tragedy, yet his sweet faith deaf to the tread of failure. Blurred the perils of a predatory history, a dark exile from childhood, from heartland, from home. Rising from this set-in-stone delusion, he shifted the downtrodden and crippled vision, stealing an unflinching tomorrow from inside his ash-filled past. Dang. Right? That's really good. You could do something like that with your own essay. And it doesn't have to be about anything that your essay is about, right? You're totally remixing it. You could make something completely different, though it could also be a way of being your narrative too. It's up to you. Now, we're not going to do this. That was in class. Or you could, and for third period, you guys are going to be doing it this way, which this is another option you can do to your own essay if you're in periods first, second, or fifth, okay? And if you had Miss Gary Net last year, you know what this is like, okay? So if you're my third period, I'm going to be giving you a ripped out piece from a book, just like in that artist that, destroyed books to make something new. I destroyed some books and ripped out some pages. Oh, I cut them out nicely for you guys to then make a poem out of whichever paper I give you. So it is very aleatory. It is very random, right? Like, look at this one. This was from some nonfiction book called All About the Sea. And because it was about the sea, they made it look like water drops. And they just connected with a Sharpie the words they picked out and blocked out the other stuff with a, like, it looks like a blue gel pen, right? And they turned it into this lovely poem. So each one of the little blurps, we know that's the line, so we can follow along. So look at this poem. The sea, the earth. We rise in the water forming with every breath burning. We unite and fill the hollows as clouds fill the sky. Nice, right? And this person limited it to only the words inside this kind of like dark sun, and it is a dark poem. Again, this person kind of drew a picture and then only picked out words they liked within it. But this one, they just picked out words they liked and then they circled around it to kind of like block out the other stuff so you could tell what the poem was. And it's pretty cool. And this is from an introduction to some like nonfiction book, and it says, some argue our views may eventually overthrow the intuitive sense. After all, genes you inherited gave you brains. We will grow up completely used. We may be nothing and everything. Isn't that sweet? There's something really cool about being forced to only use a certain set of words. And when you're kind of limited like that, it makes some really neat stuff. And here's a couple other ones just to kind of show you how you can doodle all over it. You could even like this person took pictures and cut it to make this neat effect that almost looks like gold. And then they put a skull, but they also used marker. It's pretty cool. And this was from a novel called The Zarathustra. So, and it begs that big question is whose poem is this? Well, Dadaists would say it's your poem if you made it, right? Even though the words came from Friedrich Nietzsche, right? The Prussian philosopher of the 19th century, but you connected it in such a way that made it this beautiful poem. So, like taking somebody else's work and making it new for third period only, here's your directions, okay? You would take a book page, take a pencil, choose from this paper words you want to make your poem. Circle or underline the words. Next, carefully connect each of the words that make up the lines of your poem. Design the page any way you like, but do so carefully. Next, use permanent ink, paint, or pens. Trace conscientiously and maybe add other elements too. The poem will resemble you. And there you are, an infinitely original author of charming sensibility, even though unappreciated by the vulgar herd. So here's an example that I did. I took some screenshots of it this years ago. So I just had this paper I ripped out of a book about architecture. Hang on, I got a sip. I got a tickle. Right, and I just kind of skimmed it, not even really reading it, just picking out phrases that I like that spoke to me. And once I kind of looked at the things I underlined, I might have erased a few things that didn't work out, but I tried to make it make some sense by connecting the dots. So I started circling, and notice I'm using pencil so I don't mess up. Because what if I change my mind, right? So it's all kind of a sketch using pencil at first. And then once I liked the poem that I had circled out, I then kind of started bringing out the Sharpie, right? So I connected it so you could tell which ones are the lines, right? And then I started thinking, okay, I'm going to decorate it because I love to do swirlies. That's one of my doodles. So I just started swirling because I had a green Sharpie and a black Sharpie. That's the only reason really why I used that to block out the rest. And then boom, now I've got this poem that I took out of this architecture book. And here's the poem. It says, "It is a question of explorations impossible. Knowledge is inadequate, but I have no such insight in sight. Analogies between the rising opposition and the continuing growth of formal abstract realization. A decrying of ephemeral natural phenomenon. Nature will end all discussion. Perhaps confusion is more naturally the figure of a master, reason to some degree the experiment." Right? So, and that sounds like a poem to me. I like it. I'm not sure exactly what everything means, but it sounds good, right? So, and you could do the reverse too. I'm not going to play this video for you, but it's pretty neat how they just decided, I want to draw a hot air balloon, so I'm going to do that. And then they only pick the words within the piece. So you could either pick the picture first and then only pick words within that picture, or you could pick the words and then try to design it according to what you've circled, like that water one. Now, if you are in first, second, or fifth, you can also do this, but you would not be doing it on a book page ripped out. You'd be doing it again on your own essay, You could do it on all the pages, any of the pages, it's up to you. You can make several poems out of it because most of you have like 2 to 3 pages on your final narrative. It should be 3. So you've already written your poem if you're in periods 1, 2, and 5. You're just not done editing it, if you want to think about it that way. So you can still do that same type of thing that you did with Gary, but if not, at least now you can see how you do it. And I think you might surprise yourself about the kind of profound, awesome poetry you can make by forcing yourself to be limited to just looking for words that speak to you. And it helps you kind of learn how to cut the fat and only look for like the really important, emotional, imagery-filled words, that helps you write poetry later when we start being more free to use any words we want. Okay, so that's a Dada poem. So that doesn't have anything to do with you guys. That doesn't either. I wonder why it's not letting me play that. It's just a song. Jeez. Normally in class I was playing this song called Planet Dada by a band that's a Dadaist band from Switzerland called Yellow. But they won't let me play it for some reason. Very strange. It's a permitted video. Weird. But anyway, so your homework is going to be, so don't forget. I don't know why it's not going to the next slide. Come on. Go to the next slide. There we go. So what you want to do is the next class that you come, you want to bring your finished poem, but you also need to bring a copy of Bless Me Ultima because we're going to start, I'm going to introduce it to you. We're going to start reading. Okay. So make sure you bring your copy of Bless Me Ultima and your finished poem, whichever version that your class is. Now, if you're in 3rd period, I can upload some scanned book papers that you can print out and do it, or you can just get a book page from me when you come to class. It depends on how long you're going to be gone, okay? If you're going to be gone for another week, you need to, figure it out. Find some paper. It could be one that I give you, but you could also just find an article in the newspaper or a magazine you have access to and just make one out of that. Or an old book nobody cares about that your parents gave you permission to tear up. You could do that, So I need you to find an article somewhere or a page of a book somewhere that you can alter on your own if you're in 3rd period and you're going to be gone longer than just this 1 week you've missed. For my other periods, 1, 2, and 5, you can print this out at home, your own essay, but I do have copies of your essay here. Again, same thing. If you are going to be gone longer than a week, you need to print it out yourself and alter it. Okay, that's on you. If you're going to only be gone 1 week, you can get your copy from me. That'll be okay. We can just extend it for a week and you can turn it in the following week. Okay, and for make sure, oh, never mind, that's not about you. And that's not about you. But the other thing you need to make sure you do is if you did not do your photography, take your photo of your symbolic photo of what the COVID experience has been for you. You need to get that done because we're going to be using that to write a poem next week. Okay, so make sure you got that so you're not embarrassed because you don't have anything. Okay. All right, so I hope this was helpful to kind of catch you guys up. If you have any questions, you can always send me a message and reminder or an email. Please don't ask me questions in Google Classroom. That's really hard to communicate. It's a pain in the butt. So pretty please, sugar on top, email me or send me a message and remind so we can have that conversation if you have any questions. Okay, well, I hope you have a lovely day, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.